safeguarding matters in sports? Athletes, especially young and vulnerable ones, must be protected from risks such as abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Safe sporting environment encourages personal growth, mental well-being, and community development. At this point, we will invite our safeguarding officer, Ms. Kalisha Ashton York, to give the welcoming and opening remarks.
Good night to everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests and fellow committee members. Welcome to the official launch of Safe Sports. It is an honor to stand before you today as both a member of the Safe Sports Committee and a safeguarding officer for St. Vincent and the Grenadines Olympic Committee. Today marks a significant milestone in our collective journey to ensure that sports environments are safe, inclusive, and supportive for all participants. As we gather here, we reaffirm our commitment to safeguarding and the well-being of athletes, coaches, and all those involved in sports. The essence of safe sport is rooted in the principles of respect, integrity, and protection. Our mission is to create a culture where everyone can participate in sports free from harm, discrimination, bullying, and abuse. This initiative is not just about setting rules and guidelines. It's about fostering an environment where everyone feels valued and protected. St. Vincent and the Grenadines Olympic Committee has seen firsthand the positive impact of sports, that sports can have on individuals and communities. However, we are also aware of the challenges and risks that comes with it. As a safeguarding officer, I have witnessed the need for proactive measures and continuous education to protect our athletes and ensure their holistic development. Today's launch is a call for action for all of us. It is an invitation to collaborate, share best practices, and support each other in this vital endeavor. Our collective efforts will pave the way for a safer and more equitable future in sports. I want to extend my gratitude to everyone who has worked tirelessly to bring this initiative to life. Your dedication and passion are the driving forces behind Safe Sports. Today, together, we can make a difference and set a standard for safety in sports that will inspire future generations. Thank you for being here today and for your unwavering support. Let's continue to champion the cause of safe sport and ensure that every athlete, coach, and participant can thrive in a secure and nurturing environment.
Thank you so much, Ms. York. Before we have the remarks by the SVG NOC President, Mr. Stephen Joachim, it's a recorded message because he has traveled for business, so he's out of state. I just want to give you some points on why safeguarding in sports matters. One, it is important because the protection of vulnerable individuals is extremely important in our society. Two, building trust is critical for parents, athletes, coaches, and everyone involved, whether directly or indirectly. And fostering development. As our country continues to develop in all sectors, we have to ensure that our athletes are protected and everyone affiliated with the sports, whether directly or indirectly. And so it's important that sports is a critical avenue for personal growth and development, but that growth cannot happen in a space where athletes don't feel safe, physically, emotionally, and mentally. And there are cases where they do feel safe, but we may recognize that the environment is not safe, and it is our responsibility to ensure that we protect them even if they don't see the harm that is potentially there to create a problem for them. The building trust is so important because a safe sport environment builds trust between athletes, coaches, and family. And when athletes feel protected and respected, they perform at their best. Sometimes we criticize, why is this athlete not performing? Why is this happening? Why is that not happening? When we don't know all the circumstances surrounding that person. So if we can create and encourage and foster safe environments for them, then we give them the potential to operate at their optimal best. Additionally, why is the protection of vulnerable individuals important? Children especially are young athletes and they must be nurtured in environments free from harm, abuse, or exploitation. Safeguarding ensures that every individual, regardless of age or ability, can participate in sports without fear. Additionally, they are representing our country in spaces locally, regionally, and internationally. They are a brand, they are part of our cultural identity, and we must ensure that they're protected. At this point, we will get the message from the SVGOC president.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Svgoc, the president of the SVG Olympic Committee. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the SVG Olympic Committee. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the launching of the Safeguarding and Safe Sport Commission of the Olympic Committee. My apologies for not being able to attend in person as I'm out of the country. The Safeguarding Safe Sport Commission was set up by the Olympic Committee to serve as the governing body responsible for overseeing safeguarding and supporting a zero-tolerance approach to abuse in all sports affiliated to our Olympic Committee. Safeguarding is about protecting children and adults from harm, promoting their welfare, and in doing so creating an environment that enables children and adults to grow, develop, and achieve their full potential. We live in a country that faces challenging issues around sexual abuse and other criminal activity. We live in a society that needs to be changed. We need to protect our young people both in sport and outside of sport. We need to change a culture that in many cases tolerates and condones sexual assault and molestation. We need to change our society's attitudes to alcohol and to drug abuse. We start by building awareness of these issues. Education around the issues must be the starting point. We need to raise consciousness of the problems and the issues. While the issues faced are all across our society and across the various socioeconomic levels, we start by focusing on those involved in sports. This is our first and primary mandate. I believe that the starting point for this commission should be focusing on sports administrators and coaches. These groups need to be made aware of the problems involving sexual abuse, drug use, and alcohol abuse. We also need to make the athletes aware of these issues. This is about education. We need to stop glorifying drug and alcohol use. We need to develop systems and organizational structures to deal with problems. We need our young people to know where to turn and where to seek help if they feel threatened or abused. This Safeguarding Safe Sport Commission has an important and critical mission. It is challenging and can seem overwhelming. My advice to you on the commission is to start small and focus on small groups or communities where you can have a major impact. Choose sports federations that are more likely to be receptive to your message. Be practical in terms of what you can achieve and over what time frame. If you can get a few sports federations and a few communities to buy into your message and to develop the structures for education and reporting, then these can be used as examples to others to spread the message. In concluding my remarks, I want again to emphasize the important role you as Commission members have chosen to undertake. If you work diligently and focus, then you can make changes which are long-lasting and can start to change our society for the better. Thank you for choosing to serve on this important commission. We at the Olympic Committee will support and help your commission in any way that we can. Good luck on this launch event and my best wishes for a successful start to your commission's work. Thank you.
Why it is important to have safeguarding officers. And what is the role of safeguarding officers in sports? 1. Key advocates for safety. Safeguarding officers are the champions for safe sports. They are the first line of defense, ensuring policies are implemented and any issues are addressed. Promoting awareness, and this is part of what we're doing tonight as well. Their role goes beyond enforcement. They educate coaches, parents, and athletes about boundaries, safe practices, and reporting mechanisms, and maintaining accountability, which is very important. Safeguarding officers ensure that everyone involved in sports is accountable for creating and maintaining safe environments. At this point, we will invite two of our safeguarding officers to do a special item. This is meant to break the ice.
Hello, good night, everyone. Good night. To one pause, nobody else say good night. All right, good night. My name is Serena Miller, and next to me is Kia Prince. We are mental performance coaches. So a mental performance coach is someone, a professional, who provides psychological support and equip athletes with psychological skills to help them improve their performance. So just like how you would have a physical coach come and work on the physical aspects of the sport, a mental performance coach will equip athletes with tools where they can learn to manage pressure, goal set, visualization, imagery, coping with their emotions, etc. So there's definitely a need for mental performance coach because sport is a lot more mental than physical. So we're going to share a tool with you tonight that you could use with your athletes or even use with yourself. So a common tool that is often overlooked when dealing with stress or a tough situation is breathing. So breathing is free. You don't have to buy it. You don't have to pay it. And it's a very useful tool. So mindfulness and performance expert George Mumford emphasizes that our breath is the anchor to the present. And studies have shown that people who practice deep breathing exercises have increased attention, which leads to better performance and mental clarity. Even athletes or musicians who have performance anxiety may find that deep breathing can aid in their focus. It can help them deal with their anxiety, which in turn leads to better performance. So a breathing exercise that we'll be teaching you tonight is box breathing. And I'll hand it over to Ms. Kia Prince.
Good night, everyone. So this is going to be very interactive. You get to join in and participate. So basically what box breathing is using, you could visualize it as well. It's 16 seconds, nothing more. For each side of the box, you're going to go 4 seconds. So we're going to go 4 seconds, inhale it, and we're going to hold it for 4 seconds, and then we're going to exhale for 4 seconds, then we're going to hold that exhale for 4 seconds. Why are we doing this? Because in safeguarding, we're going to deal with a lot of matters that we're not comfortable with, that becomes overwhelming at times, and we need to self-regulate in order to help other people. So Serena and I are going to demonstrate. First of all, you sit upright, feet on the floor, palms facing your thighs. Close your eyes. And we're going to inhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Start exhaling. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Open your eyes. Feeling any sort of relief as yet? No? Okay, we're going to go up another level. So this time, when we're inhaling, we're going to inhale something positive that we want. And we're going to hold that positivity for 4 seconds, and then we're going to start exhaling something negative that's been affecting us all week, and just get rid of it and see if it works. So we're going to try again. Sit upright, palms on your thighs, eyes closed, and inhale. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Start exhaling. 2, 3, 4. And hold. 2, 3, 4. Now, do we feel something? Yes, no, maybe? Did I just waste your time? Okay, so essentially this is what you could do for 16 seconds to just reset and basically release a little bit of stress that's built up in your body.
All right, so just to kind of reinforce what Kia was saying, is that breathing is something that you could do, especially in tough situations. Just take a deep breath, and it helps to clear your mind and think from a better place of clarity. Even sometimes it's hard to make tough decisions, or you probably want to speak about something, or you don't want to retaliate in a way that you probably would regret later. Just take a deep breath, calm yourself down, and have more clearer thoughts. So benefits of breathing includes reducing stress, it enhances focus, it builds confidence, and it also promotes mindfulness. So when you find yourself feeling overwhelmed, pause and take a deep breath. Calm your mind and body. Inhale confidence while exhaling doubt. Clear your thoughts and then decide on your next step with clarity. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. I really hope that was a good icebreaker. And some persons didn't answer, but it actually felt good to me, especially when I did that last one. So, before we get remarks from the representative from the Ministry of Sports, which would be in the person of Mr. Khalil Kato, who is Admin Officer 2, we're just going to give you 3 inspiration for St. Vincent and the Grenadines as it relates to safe sports. So one, which is very important, is community resilience. As a nation, we're known for our resilience and community spirit, and so it's important for us to channel that energy into protecting our athletes and ensuring that they strive and thrive in safe spaces. Like St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I'm sure you all know, and I don't have to reiterate, but you guys, we guys, are so talented. Like, there's so many talented athletes here, so many talented young people. And sometimes the only thing that sets Vincentians apart from any other country is just the resource or the opportunity. And so we want to prepare our athletes so when the resource is available and when the opportunity becomes available, then they're ready and prepared to grab that and to just display their best. Jamaicans would normally say we're little but we're talawa, but I literally have found an island that is littler and more talawa, or as talawa as Jamaicans, and that's just a very big deal for St. Vincent. And I always use every opportunity to remind us of how resilient, how powerful, how amazing we are as Vincentian people. You guys are loved. Everywhere you go, people love you, and don't ever lose that about you. Just understand that you are powerful and that any space that you enter, you deserve to be there, and you can and you will perform at your optimal best. And that is why the SVG NOC sees it important to ensure that they put mechanisms in place so that our athletes, our coaches, everyone who is in the sporting arena and in that space can operate at the level of excellence that we need to operate. So I just want to give the SVG NOC a big round of applause, the Olympic Committee, for seeing it as important in pushing these things. And these are small steps. So sometimes people want to see the big parade and all of that, but these are some of the small important steps that are necessary in taking us to where we need to go. And sometimes, you know, people see the big things, but they don't see you paddling like a duck under the, they don't see that part of the journey, they only see the final product. So these are important components of us that needs to take us to where we need to go. And next thing is setting standards. It's very important as we move forward and we are on international stages that we operate at a particular standard. It can't be business as usual. So St. Vincent and the Grenadines has the power to lead by example in the region by prioritizing safeguarding. We show the world that we value our people as much as our potential for greatness in sports. Listen to me, if you guys weren't convinced before, let me tell you, Shafiqa Maloney moved from 27th to 4th. That is a big jump. And she did it with all the odds set against her. So performing at your best when everything is good is great. But performing at your best when you're set up to fail, for whatever reason that is, we have to see how resilient and powerful and great we are as a people. And I just want you to, in all the positiveness in your mind, to keep that at the forefront, that we are greater than any circumstance that surrounds us. And again, that is why it's important to put these things in place so that when we and our athletes are able to perform, that they're doing it in safe spaces, that we can produce the best under all circumstances. And the last point that we're going to make as it relates to St. Vincent is empowering the next generation. Imagine a future where every child can look back on their time in sports and say, I was not only encouraged to dream big, but I was also protected every step of the way. That is a legacy that we're building today. And the reality is like a lot of athletes before us didn't have that opportunity. A lot of them have been affected in a lot of ways. And as you know, our two safeguarding officers before expressed the importance of the mentals in sports. People see the physical component of it, but some persons who are so great don't even be as great as they can be because the mental component is not in sync with the physical component. And so to give our athletes the very best chance in all of the spaces that they deserve to be is ensuring that they're safe in doing so. At this point, I will tired of hearing my own voice, so I'm going to invite Mr. Khalil Kato, the representative from the Ministry of Sports, to give us some remarks. Give him a warm welcome.
All right, thank you very much, Nico. Good night, everyone. And I bring greetings to you from the Minister of Housing, Youth and Sports, the Honorable Dr. Orlando Brewster. And through the Ministry of Sports, the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines supports this initiative, saying that it is very timely in the sense that the Division of Physical Education and Sports and the Ministry of Sports on a whole has plans on developing a policy document for 2025, which would deal with sports, that would deal with safety in sports. This is actually at the top of the agenda for the new year, for the coming new year. Activities include planned stakeholder consultations, working with coaches as well. Moves like this have already started. A few years ago, there was a child safety in sports program that members of the division had to go through, where they were certified in child safety as well. And we also see the need for there to be safety in sports on a broad spectrum. There have been times when I've seen sports competitions, in particular our inter-schools football competition and netball, to extend it to there, where injuries are sustained on the field and the coach or manager or whoever it is runs onto the field and all he has with him is a bottle of water. I know they say water is the elixir of life, but some sort of medical attention would have to be given. A lot of times, the teachers and PE teachers don't have first aid awareness to be able to administer that to that injured student or injured player. Also, we've had a history of violence surfacing in a lot of our sports competitions. Even just recently, in our own inter-schools football competition, it reared its ugly head, and that wasn't the first time. We also would have heard of instances where teams would have attacked and assaulted officials just because they simply didn't like the fact that maybe a decision didn't go their way or not. So an initiative like this, it shows, especially in that regard, how much, as Kia and Serenia highlighted, the mental aspect of the sport. They have to make sure that they are on point and will have to be able to deal with different situations. A lot of times people say, get into sports because you can learn discipline. But it actually works differently. You have to be disciplined to be successful in sports. And it's time that we start to let our children understand that. You could be the greatest footballer, cricketer, netballer, basketballer, track athlete, volleyballer, what have you. If you lack the mental fortitude to maintain your composure in all aspects of the game, then you're really not going to go very far. So again, an initiative like this is highly supported by the Ministry of Sports and the government on a whole. And we, as I mentioned, the policy document is being worked on, and it will continue to be worked on in 2025, and not just to make it a document, but also to make it actionable, so that it can more or less become a bill in Parliament for passing, so that it can actually be law to ensure that certain actions can be taken as it relates to safety in sports. Again, we support this initiative. We wish everyone all the best, and we pledge the full support of the Ministry of Sports in this venture. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cato. And at this point, we will cushion the talking as well with a light item by Mr. Kevin Glasgow. Give him a warm welcome, please.
Good night, everyone. So I'm going to just merge the breath work with some mental work. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. But sometimes I wonder what he can do for me. No great success to show, no glory of my own, but in my weakness he is there to let me know his strength is perfect when all our strength is gone. He'll carry us when we can't carry on. Raising his power, the weak become strong. His strength is perfect. His strength is perfect. His strength is perfect when all our strength is gone. He'll carry us when we can't carry on. Raising his power, the weak become strong. His strength is perfect. His strength is perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Glasgow. And indeed, his strength is perfect. At this point of the program, we're going to dive into the discussions. And it is the topic for the discussion tonight is bridging the gap between sports and safety. Our first panelist for the discussion tonight is Miss Maurice Franklin. She is a professional with experience in law who has developed her leadership abilities and communication and interpersonal skills, as well as her ability to develop logical and open-minded approaches to problem solving. Almost a decade has passed since she began practicing law, which has allowed her to develop a strong understanding of the legal system. The Ministry of Legal Affairs currently employs Ms. Maurice Franklin as Crown Counsel 1. I know she looks like about 16, but I promise you she has over 10 years of experience in this field. Can we give a warm welcome to Ms. Franklin? Our next panelist is Mr. Stephen Billy, a professionally skilled, dedicated police officer with 22 years of experience, including 12 as detective. Professional expertise in criminal investigation, mentoring young people, and engaging the community. Acclaimed for excellence in police training, firearms proficiency, and evidence collection, an expert at fostering partnership between law enforcement and community organizations. Currently, Sergeant Stephen Billy oversees the Police Youth Club's national activities as coordinator. Give him some love now. Dr. Alisa Alvis. I said it correctly? Good. So, scientist, practitioner, experience in assessment, intervention, and consultation in kindergarten to grade 12 schools, higher education, private practice, hospitals, and forensic settings. Experienced therapist and clinical supervisor with expertise in both individual and group therapy. Over 15 years of clinical experience, including youth work and involvement in the educational sector as volunteer, college lecturer, and school counselor. Multicultural, sensitive, and reflective, with a history of training and mental health service provisions in the Caribbean, United Kingdom, United States, and Canada. Dr. Alisa Alvis is the Director of Mental Health Services within the Ministry of Health, Wellness, and the Environment. Again, she looks way younger than her years, but I promise you, she has the expertise to go with that. And we have our very own Mr. Yes, give her the love. Mr. Shimano Bailey, diligent and committed social worker, and a former cyclist who has stayed with the sport and over the years expanded his interest to work with several other sporting organizations, including the St. Vincent and the Grenadines Olympic Committee. As the vice president of the organization, Mr. Bailey spearheads the safeguarding program along with Sporting Initiative. Our very own Mr. Shimano. And join us by Zoom because he is out of state, is the very humble. He prefers that we mention nothing, but of course I wouldn't stand here and do that. Mr. Keith Joseph, and he's a seasoned sports administrator with over 4 decades. He doesn't look his age, but we understand. 4 decades of sports development within the Olympic movement and athletics around the world. Mr. Keith Joseph is currently the president of the Caribbean Association of National Olympic Committees. So welcome, sir, and thank you for joining us by Zoom. And so I'm going to invite our panelists to now go and be seated so we can look into your beautiful faces and discuss a very important topic. Beautiful and handsome faces. Okay, so the theme, bridging the gap between sports and safety. Oh, you guys need mics. So my responsibility at this point is actually to moderate the program, if I didn't say what I was doing at this point. So the topic is bridging the gap between sports and safety. We already know who our panelists are, so we're going to dive right in. We're going to discuss first why safeguarding matters in sports. And we will start with the lawyer. What legal protection exists to safeguard athletes from abuse and exploitation, and how can laws be improved to better enforce or to address the gaps for athletes in safety? And that's between you and Mr. Billy. I see him looking over to you like you take this one, but let's start there.
I'll start, but I won't cover the entire area. So basically what we have right now would be contained within our criminal code. Those provisions would Okay, let's try this again. Nope. Hi. Okay, cool. Right, so as I was saying, we have our criminal code and the structure that exists there. So that would ordinarily offer protection for the entire populace, right? In terms of specific provisions, you would have heard, I believe it was Khalil in his remarks, he indicated that they're trying to work on a policy specifically addressing safeguarding. And as you would have mentioned, I work within the chambers of the Attorney General. So we act on instructions. So once the ministry has identified this as a point of concern, as an area that they wish to have addressed, then once they've created the policy would be able to guide our drafters, and it would also motivate, I believe, their minister to push for the necessary legislative measures. But as it stands right now, we don't specifically have measures that are designed to safeguard athletes. So that's why the push has to come from the organization itself. And now I'm going to let Sergeant Billy speak to the actual provisions we have.
I don't want him to speak it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to ask everyone a question and have you speak on that. so that can stir the debate. And then you'll get an opportunity to jump in. So we get to hear what you guys have to say and your feelings around it, and then we get into the meat of the matter. And if there's any burning questions or issues, you can just direct it to one of our safeguarding officers and they'll give it to me and we can address it here. All right. So Sergeant Billy, your time. What measures are in place to handle cases of abuse or misconduct in sports?
Well, as my colleague mentioned, the criminal code is what offers protection for all individual, be it athlete or otherwise. But I have a keen interest in seeing policies being developed by sporting bodies, right, that is geared towards directly protecting our athletes, especially our children and young people. I have a passion for youth, right, and the Child Care and Protection and Abduction Act 2010 also speaks about the care and protection of our youth and our children, right? So there are acts in place to protect children and youth generally. But as my colleague said, there's none specifically to target sports. And I think it is time that the sporting bodies enact policies that will guide all involved, be it coaches, administrators, van drivers, teachers, the whole works. Once you are involved in youth and youth development in terms of the athletes, there must be a policy that is geared to set as a guideline and use as a code of ethics for which they should operate. And it shouldn't be something that you only have to say you have a policy. It must have bite. So there must be some disciplinary aspect to it, not only internally, but as it relates to when they violate the laws of the country beyond the ethical issues, they actually break the law, then there must be a way to prosecute them as well. It shouldn't be, oh, we see you come on television, the coach is being let go, and or because we have differences in the direction for which the organization is going, we'll let him go, which is not true. He probably violated and seriously violated some of the athletes, but then that person is left now to go out in the community and seek employment elsewhere without there is anything to flag and document these behaviors so that it can be used as reference in future application of these persons. So I think it's important that, although there's no specific thing, and as my colleague said, it's time that the sporting bodies do something to come up with their own policy. We can't always wait until legislation comes from government. When you have a body and you're governed by your own code of ethics and conduct, you should also implement such policy to help.
All right, getting a little bit spicy, I'm feeling warm. For the psychologist, how does trauma from unsafe environments impact an athlete's performance and mental health?
So it's hard to overstate.
Mr. Cato, technical support, please.
It's because of where
Try.
All right, let's see. Okay.
Multifunctional, multi-purpose athlete, sport representative, Mr. Khalil Cato.
Yes,
Thank you.
very much so. So in terms of how trauma can impact somebody's performance, it's hard to overstate the ways in which trauma impacts somebody's functioning just in general. So particularly because a lot of what we're here to talk about tonight, we're here talking about sports and athletes, but inevitably in talking about sports and athletes, we end up talking about youth. And so among the things that comes to my mind as a clinician is when traumatic things are happening to people at sensitive times for their development. So these are things that might go on to impact a person's sense of whether the world is a safe place, whether and how they can count on the people around them to actually look after them and keep them safe. The notion of the close relationships that form between coaches and athletes, between members of a team, and how that can go on to shape somebody's ideas around what is a healthy relationship. What does caring for somebody look like? What does love look like? And if ideas of pain and abuse get interwoven into somebody's concepts around that, we can see how that's going to impact them as a person. So before we even talk about how it's going to affect their performance, on a field, a pitch, a court, what is that going to do to them in terms of just being able to show up as a human? And then in terms of how it may potentially impact their performance, well, that really does depend on the nature of the trauma that they have experienced. I mean, some people have experienced really abusive strategies that are designed to supposedly improve someone's performance. The notion of, say, pushing somebody beyond their limits, but then maybe taking that to a place of actually harming someone, maybe going to a place of being humiliating or demeaning for the purposes of having somebody push past their supposed limits. And yes, what we may see as good performance on a field, that might be impacting that person adversely in another environment, right? But of course, you could see somebody who it was previously maybe a person who was showing up well in whatever it is the sport that they're playing, and because they have been subject to some kind of abuse, now seeing their behaviors change. And that's one of the things that we tend to look for just in general when we're thinking of, okay, has somebody been potentially subject to something adverse? Have they become more withdrawn? Has their performance waned in some way where they were previously enthusiastic about this sport that they were performing in, or it was something they really loved and now they don't love it as much, or they're talking about wanting to quit, wanting to drop out? Those might all be signs that, hey, there's something that is happening to this person. So I realize I've given you a meandering answer, but it's because it can show up different ways for different people. And it really depends on the type of trauma that was suffered and in what circumstance. And as I think we've seen from stories in places other than St. Vincent, a person can be very much traumatized and performing, looking like everything is fine, but they're really not.
Wow, thanks for that answer. For the social worker, what role does community outreach play in safeguarding athletes, especially youths?
It plays a critical role because if you go back to sociology, we are part of a community. From the moment you're born, you're part of a structure, institution. And because if you're part of that institution, that structure, everything around you is affected. The environment, and as social workers, we look at the critical part of in terms of the environment, how the environment impacts us. If you're part of a community that is positive, then you will see positive changes. If you're part of a community that is negative, then you'll see negative thoughts, negative patterns happening with this person. And until a person gets out of that environment, that community that they're part of, then nothing will change. So the community has a tremendous impact on an individual.
All right, so Mr. Joseph, this is the head of the National Sports and Olympic Committee, or in that general scope. How does your organization or the organizations that you're a part of ensure that safeguarding policies are actively followed? Whether or not we have them, but if we do, how they're followed? Or how do we intend to follow them? You hearing? Should I repeat? You hear it now? Can you hear me now? I see something moving up there. Are you hearing me now, Keith? No, nothing? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? I'm gonna try this one more time. Can you hear me? Send him a message and let him talk and see if we can hear him. Just ask him to speak, please. Say something. Can you hear me now, Keith? Shake your head. Okay, I'm gonna send him a message and then. The role of our judiciary system, the role of our psychologists and our social worker, how the community impacted the individual role. The thing is, in the Caribbean, it is so tricky because how we express and show love is and we always make jokes about it, like, you think if in America, this is what you can do and what you can get away with, but in the Caribbean, this is what you can do and you can't get away with. And so even how we're scolded comes across as abuse for a lot of us. So, Keith, can you hear us now? May I answer? I don't know what to do. All right, so panel, we have a challenge in the Caribbean where obviously the way we do things have to change as it relates to safeguarding our athletes. And the safeguarding is not just for the athletes, but it's for our coaches as well. And for example, you can't just run and smack your athlete on the bottom or a fellow player on the bottom. You can't just run and jump up on a coach anymore, like with your legs wrapped around them. And so some of the things that we do naturally in the Caribbean, just because that's what we've done all our lives, is inappropriate. I don't know who want to take this first, but how do we address some of these things, and what does it look like in terms, whose responsibility really is it? I noticed both the legal component of it said that the sporting organization need to do more in terms of putting these things in place, but whose responsibility is it really to put these things in place to protect the athletes and our children? We know we have general laws, but then we need to specify them now when we, especially at the Olympic level, they're asking that safeguarding tools and officers be in place to protect against these things. And so we have to do an awareness, because we have to change the way we operate. Generally, what is accepted that we've done naturally as part of our socialization for all our lives now have to change, or we can get into serious trouble, even our mindset as it relates to alcohol use, marijuana use, etc. Can you speak to that, please?
All right, so basically what you're speaking about is culture. And that's one of the things that we, within the Olympic Committee Safeguarding Commission, has to look at because of what our culture accepts. One of the things that, in terms of safeguarding, is that there are mass participation events. For example, we just had the Olympic Games, and one of the things that they were speaking about, one of the rules that they wanted us to look at, is that they changed, France had just changed their laws in terms of sexual harassment. And what we would consider, the men would be considered in terms of seeping another, a woman, that was a criminal offense. So one of the things that the Olympic Committee hopes to do in the future is that when persons are going to go out to represent the culture, the country, they are socialized and informed of the culture that they're going into. Because certain cultures, the way a woman cannot speak to a man unless her husband is there. So one of the things that we have to look at is the cultural aspect of it and changing the culture on a whole. Once the sporting culture here is different from what we'll see in Barbados, what we'll see in Jamaica, for example. So we have to develop a culture where we are comfortable within our own nationality, and we're able to express it as we go further internationally, regionally, participate in the Commonwealth Games, the Olympic Games. So we have to look at culture per se. And once we can change our sporting culture, the way we look at safety, then we can think of how the broader perspective.
I would add that in terms of responsibility, I heard Mr. Cato mention, and I think that there's a place we should start, in the schools, primary, secondary. And if we're talking about culture and cultural changes, we have to then impart that at that level. So it starts with education and information being passed to the coaches, the teachers, and all those who are involved. And then they have to now impart those same information to the athletes, the children from such young ages. And it is important because even if all the other bodies in sports enact a safeguarding policy and the Ministry of Sports doesn't, it's still going to have an impact on the athletes and the way they operate. And so I think that part of the responsibility as well is for programs, policies like that to be put in place at the primary school level, secondary school, and of course the college level, to ensure that the culture, a new culture in terms of athletes' behavior. Yes, we have our own culture, and I heard the president spoke about it, Mr. Joachim, he just said that we have to learn to change our culture and stop glorifying some of the things that we are now glorifying because they are not really ethical. And especially in the world of sports, and if we want our children to excel and to reach at the highest level to represent St. Vincent and the Grenadines, by extension, we have to teach them the culture that is acceptable in the international arena. Yes, we were not going to give up our identity altogether, but at the same time, when it comes to ethics and morals and behaviors, because what is so important of slapping an athlete and their buttocks? Why is that acceptable, especially in this age? So I don't see that as something, even though we say it's culture, that should be practiced anyway. So some of these so-called cultural practices that we have should change in order to protect our athletes, because we don't want them to think it's okay, because it's like your own child. If you bring up your children in a certain way, if you teach them a certain way, that person, anybody can come and kiss them and hug them in a way. You started from the beginning, and it's okay to do that. Predators can take that opportunity to then lure your children away and abuse them sexually and otherwise. So it's the same thing with the athletes. So we have to ensure that we let them know that there are certain things that is just unacceptable, and regardless of who is doing it, it is not acceptable. And it starts from the level. And of course, the parents have to be educated so that they too have a responsibility in bringing about the change in that culture.
So just in terms of what he's saying, what emerges is that you need an integrated approach. And we have to be careful not to work within our own little silos. So for example, he was referencing, oh yes, let's incorporate it into the educational measures. Yes, but the educational measures must consult with, for example, the child protection unit. You must consult with the sporting sector. So we would need to work together to craft these policies and to ensure that the change in culture does happen.
Which part of it would be more the role of the government, and which of it would be more the role of the sporting committees? For example, certain things culturally acceptable and not acceptable, it's deep. For example, what governs how a father-son or mother-daughter, if they're coaching their own child, or a husband, or if they're not, how we separate grooming, because a lot of those things have been acceptable earlier within the Caribbean. We know that this person is 30-something, and they were the coach for this athlete, and they've had this long relationship. So clearly the relationship started from when the person was underage, and so like when does the law step in? Because we do have some laws in place for certain things, but we generally as a society just turn a blind eye to certain things. I know it's a bit sensitive, but the whole point of safeguarding is to explain to persons or to help them to understand the varied levels of implication that this can have for us as a country and for athletes, for our law enforcement, and because it can be a big can of worms if not addressed properly.
Right, but I think you're looking at it from the perspective of, okay, yes, we would like the government to get the ball rolling. We want them because we know that once the law is in place, we have the officers, and the officers can enforce the law. But we need to not underestimate the power of our own little, I want to say like microcultures, our little societies, as it were, the power of our individual organizations, right? Because you have to understand, okay, I might want legislation to address a specific issue, but that's dependent on the agenda, the priorities of the particular minister that's assigned to that area, and it depends on the priorities of the entirety of the government and them having to balance that, right? Whereas within our own little societies where we might want to enact change, we can start the ball rolling, and then the law will follow because they'll recognize that, oh yes, the people are ready for this type of change. They will be accepting of this attempt to adjust the culture, rather than it coming from on high, as it were, and then it comes off as if, oh, look at them, they're trying to change our culture, trying to make us be this particular way, or trying to pull us up to what we might refer to as overseas standards. We don't want to be. So to avoid the sort of resistance, we have to look at what we can do within our individual spheres. That's why it's so important for the organizations to then, like for example, here tonight, we have the launch of the National Olympic Safeguarding Commission, right? So we have them, and then they in turn can influence our individual sporting federations or sporting organizations, and they can get the ball rolling in terms of awareness and having persons understand the importance of it and how to construct a proper safeguarding policy. And then you can see change, rather than us having to wait and beg and wait for legislation.
I actually had a thought too while we were talking, because the notion of what is our culture keeps coming up. And culture is normative, right? And norms shift over time. Who decides what is normal? We do, right? Any shift that has happened at a societal level has happened at the ground floor, right? Once upon a time, slavery was normative. You know, it was a very normal thing. You know, the notion of being able to own somebody was normal, right? Or, I don't know, 50 years ago, a woman not being able to have a bank account. That was normative, right? So we get to decide whether or not, for example, do we believe that children are people? Do we believe that children are people with rights? And if children are people with rights and a child is an athlete within the sphere of sports, should their rights and their safety be ensured? That's something we get to decide, right? And I would tend to agree with Ms. Franklin that you got to think about it at all of the different kind of, it's these layers that are nested within each other. Yes, we've got, that macro system of governance. And of course, we need good governance. You need institutional teeth. Like Officer Billy was saying, yes, that's true. But in order to get actual change at like the hearts and minds level, you have to do that like in your individual spheres of influence. Like talking about things like, yes, as much as a person may say, oh, I'm somebody's coach, this is an innocent relationship. Yes, but there's a power dynamic within that relationship. And we have to be conscientious about that power dynamic and what that might mean for both people who are involved. Like, we can have those conversations. And I think it's conversations we're often uncomfortable about having, but that's the place where the changes happen, the little seeds of people thinking, I accepted this thing as being normal, but who decided that this was okay, and okay for who? Right?
As we move forward in terms of, we know we have to safeguard our athletes, and we also have to safeguard our coaches and everyone in that space, because anyone can find themselves in problems if they're not following the proper accepted behavior and the codes of conduct. Now, the general question, and I'll start with our social worker, is how do we balance the need for confidentiality with the duty of reports for incidents? And so after we move from this side of the fence, we'll take it over, because confidentiality is a big problem as it relates to law enforcement, persons feeling comfortable to report it. I mean, the lawyer is easy. You can just go to the lawyer if you have a problem once you have your money and ask them to deal with the situation for you. But we have to have confidence in our systems of reporting. We have to have confidence in our social work and psychologists that we can go to them with our challenges and they would be addressed. And we have to have confidence in our system that the police will protect and not also infringe or affect the rights of these persons that we are talking about. Mr. Bailey.
So Sergeant Bailey mentioned earlier about the Child Care and Adoption Act of 2010. The Act basically says that once a child is in danger, we are mandatory reporters. And the Act specifies healthcare workers, persons in education. But it also specifies that anybody who deals with a child is responsible to report, which includes anybody who deals with them in sports. Now, once a child comes to you and tells you that, hey, my coach is doing this, or it feels uncomfortable, that person has a right by law to report it. So when it comes to confidentiality in the aspect of a child, there's only certain things that you can keep confidential because it has to be reported to the relevant authority. However, as persons within dealing with the information that is gathered, the chain of command and where it is passed on is what sometimes is the issue. Sometimes we pass on the information, and the way it's passed on is how other information, we don't know if somebody is there. So, certain people, you may be talking to a colleague, and the colleague has you on speaker, and you may not know. And somebody else is there, and then the information is passed on. So sometimes it's not the individual who the information is given to that leaks the confidentiality, but it's from an outside source. But in terms of confidentiality, it's going to be hard to keep certain things in regards to a child confidential. Because based on the law, we are mandatory report. It has to be reported. Once it deals with...
If an older athlete that is of age shares the information of abuse and asks that you don't say anything, what happens in that case?
So that's different. So based on the Domestic Act of 2015, we can't, it's not mandatory to report. So if an athlete is past the age of what is considered a child based on our act, which is anybody under the age of 18, then there's no need or urgency to report. The onus has to be on that athlete to give the consent to say, yes, go ahead and report this. But it cannot be reported. But
right.
If policies are in place that it doesn't matter the age of this person, once they have reported that abuse has taken place, then you can take the next step to go from there.
So, all right, so I'll have you all respond to that just now, and the lead up to this that I want, what if the report, what it is observed, no report has been done, but it is observed that children are being abused, whether physically, mentally, or psychologically. No report is made, but the observation is made. What happens?
Well, the Child Care and Protection Act, Adoption Act also points to what Mr. Bailey was saying. You have a right to report that on behalf of the child, because it's not every child would be in a position to actually say what have, through fear and manipulation, for whatever reason, children tend to want to keep these things to themselves. But if you are a coach and you are there and you notice your athlete is acting, out of sort and there's something wrong, and you are trying to communicate with them, and they show you some sign. They might not come out and tell you everything, but they might tell you a little bit. It is your job to seek assistance for them. The police might not be the first step, or shouldn't be, in my opinion. It should be some a child care worker, one of the counselors, somebody you can reach out to from mobilization to at least have a conversation with the child to find out what exactly is happening. Because there are a lot of dynamics that goes around these things, especially when a child is being abused. And if they're abused from within the home, and you make a report to the police, and the parents are arrested, and they're granted bail, what happens to the child? So there's a lot of factors that you have to take into consideration. But if you notice a child is being abused, even though they didn't see it, and you can see signs, as a person who's responsible for that child or those children, you have a responsibility to seek help and assistance for them. And as I said, the police may not be the first step, but whoever or whatever agencies are available to offer that assistance to these children, you should seek to get those for those children. You can't just chop your hands in the air and say, oh, well, he ain't said nothing, she ain't said nothing, maybe she's having a bad day. And you know for sure there's a pattern, and you can see that the changes in the child or children, and you can't just chop your hands in the air and say, well, he did not say anything.
Keith, are you hearing us now?
So,
Keith?
no?
You hearing us?
Yeah.
Oh, welcome. Warm welcome. Maurice will finish our point and then we'll ask you the question.
Right. So just for clarity, right? I think my colleagues were actually referencing the Domestic Violence Act. Now, that prescribes certain classes of persons that are categorized as mandatory reporters. It's not everyone that's mandated to report, so that's why it's so dependent on who has observed the abuse in question. It's dependent on that. And with regard to sport, if, say, for example, I'm an assistant coach and I observe, I'm not mandated to report because I'm not within the specific category of person.
As assistant coach?
You're not within a specific category of persons.
Who are in that category, please?
So we have teachers, we have medical professionals, we have dentists, and I believe maybe one or two other categories. But because we weren't, well, I don't want to say we, but this is I don't want to say it's a recent issue, but what you have to look into is how the law is framed, right? And if we don't have the data, the research to back it up, the studies to say, oh, well, perhaps in this year, we would have noticed that there were 2,000 reported cases of X, Y, or Z, it's very unlikely that that would be a consideration at the time of drafting of this specific legislation. And you have to remember that legislation covers relationships within the home, right? Might be within the household, but it's not covering those external relationships. That's a different concept entirely. So we need to be careful when we're discussing that aspect of it.
One other piece of legislation, the Child Care and Adoption Act.
The Child Care and the Children Care and Adoption Act looks at children in need of care and protection.
Right.
with regard to their home situation, so it caters for adoptions,
But
and it
not like
caters
school or
for,
sports.
say, the ministry, well, I wouldn't say the ministry, the director of childcare having to remove a child from the home because the home is an unsafe environment. But again, we're not looking at those external relationships. So that's why we would have made earlier reference to the provisions contained within the criminal code, because that governs external relationships, relationships outside the context of the household. Okay?
Okay.
Okay.
I think we said, but the Child Care and Adoption Act also says, I could remember vividly, that a parent or guardian who knows or should know that the child would be in danger, they have a responsibility. Not necessarily, if you're saying that is only within the home.
The home or the household.
Home.
So not, I don't mean the physical home, I mean your family unit, whatever is comprised within there.
Right. So, but if the child is at school and you're responsible for the care and
Teacher.
right, and then if the school, I'm getting there. So if the child is on the track team, who's responsible for that?
Right, so that's what Ms. Franklin's pointing out, that the act that you're referring to would cover whether something is happening to that child in their home, and anything that's happening external. I mean, the whole point of needing policy and legislation otherwise is because the only other coverage is provided under the criminal code. Do I have you correctly now? Right.
Wow. Thanks
And the
for-
criminal code does not explicitly indicate mandated reporting of the kind that you're talking about.
All right, Mr. Joseph, Keith?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, welcome again, sir. You dropped out of part of the discussion. Well, initially we were asking, as the head of the Sports and Olympic Committee, or in that general realm of leadership, how does the organization ensure safeguarding policies are actively followed, if there are any safeguarding policies, or how do you intend to ensure that they're followed, or just your 2 cents on it in general?
You're reading from a script. You have a question.
I have some questions that I have here, but if you want to ignore my question, you could just answer what you want to answer.
But I'm not clear on your question.
All right, so obviously we're talking about bridging the gap between sports and safety. As your bio would have said, your role, seasoned administrator with over 4 years of sports development. Just give us some comments on that, please.
No, I'm not getting you clearly. Shamana, you want to tell me what you're saying?
Break it down for him, please. Yeah, so do I speak? What do you want me to talk? Just break it down. You heard me better now, Keith?
No. Just ask. Yeah.
You heard me better, Keith?
But maybe that's what was the problem.
Oh, I was the problem. All right. So let's solve it now. As your role, just give us some comments generally regarding safeguarding. We're exploring it, the importance of it. What do you or your organization intend to do in terms of ensuring safeguarding for our athletes?
The reason we have established the commission is in large measure as a result of a mandate that we have been given as a result of the situation that has developed in sport. And I say that with a certain amount of bother, in large measure because the safeguarding is not something that is new. The challenges that we have faced in terms of sport has always been with us from the very beginning of sport. And we just kept turning a blind eye to it. Had there not been a furor emerging around the situation in US gymnastics and then English gymnastics, we probably would not have been here. So in a sense, we are very, very late in the game in terms of responding to an issue or issues that are particularly bothersome globally and have been for a very long time. And so we may have lost a number of people to sport and a number of people in society generally as a result of our own failure to address these problems as they would have been evident all around us. So in a sense, we have failed the children, we have failed the athletes, we have failed communities and societies generally. But now we're where we are, and we have to do this. And so we have started off by identifying people who we thought were appropriately qualified or who had enough of an interest in addressing this problem, and hence the commission members that you have sitting among you, with Shimano leading the fray at this point. There are a number of things that we have to do, and there are a number of things that we should do. But it's interesting listening to the piece I just heard about the family and the little banter between the panelists, because the bedrock of society is the family. But we need to understand that what we're dealing with is a cultural problem. It's a cultural problem in terms of the way our families are. Some are organized, some are not organized. Some are whole and some are dysfunctional. We are also operating within a sporting culture within the society that is also not particularly wholesome, very varied. We're dealing with a national culture as distinct from separate community cultures. But the interventions that we are seeking must go much, much deeper than mere surface interventions, because we are dealing with a global environment that is doing more socialization of our children than our families, even within our respective countries. The attention economy is real. There are so many different agencies clamoring for people's attention that we're not quite sure who is socializing whom. And that is a big thing. People are being socialized by the tablets that they have, by the phones that they use, by the messaging that they get from a variety of sources, some of whom they don't even know. And so this clash of cultures is a major, major factor, and we have to get to the bottom of it if we are going to make any sort of intervention meaningful within Vincentian society. So what we are hoping to do, let me tell you, we are hoping that the commission, and that would include some of the people on the panel who are not yet on the commission, but who will be asked to help with interventions. But we really do have to, first of all, as far as I'm concerned, identify and classify the types of abuses that our people are exposed to. We need to look at the facilities that we have that are currently in place, including equipment, including the expertise that are available to assist with the analysis of our findings, and to put in place mechanisms that would facilitate adequately addressing them. That begins with a serious awareness program of what constitutes safeguarding. It addresses the issue of the kind of education programs that would be necessary, the kind of training that persons would have to be engaged in. I see the education and training as a continuous process. The more we research, the more we will find the need for increasing our competencies. And, you know, we need horses for courses. That is to say that we need appropriately qualified, experienced, competent safeguarding personnel. And we need to have, while we're focusing on sporting organizations, that is one sector of the society. And what safeguarding in sport may very well seek to do may be undermined by what is happening in the broader society, hence the importance of policing, hence the importance of health personnel in terms of how we approach it. So it has to be multi-sectoral, it has to be multifaceted, it has to be multidisciplinary. And I think that is what we are asking. It is a major task, but sport cannot be effective in terms of safeguarding if we think that safeguarding is only related to sport. It has to do with the entire society. If we miss that point, then we're not going to get very far. That's the mandate that we are asking of you.
Thank you, Mr. Keith. That was a mouthful and a lot to consider and right on point. I did get a question, comment here for the panel. There's an issue when policies conflict. Shimano said the Child Care Act says once you're made aware of abuse, you should report it. But according to the Education Act, a teacher must alert the principal. This came out recently where a child reported abuse to her teacher and the teacher told the principal, then the principal tried to contact the chief education officer. It wasn't until when contact with the CEO wasn't made, the police were notified.
Right. So that's why it's so important for the education aspect, because we need to be aware of the reporting channels. So yes, okay, within the school context, you are required to, well, go through your administration, your principal, right? But then your principal would then have to have an interactions with the Ministry of Mobilization.
What if the principal is the problem?
Report the principal?
To who? Because it's a channel.
No.
Because some of the persons that we are supposed to report to are abusers as well.
Right? So it wouldn't be that it's an absolute. We do have discretion to interpret or act within the particular context that it's applying to. So it wouldn't be a situation where, oh, my principal is clearly abusing my students and I'm going to report said abuse to said principal. Makes no sense. So that's why we need to ensure that our teachers, our other mandatory reporters are aware of their rights and responsibilities under the Act. Right, so if you skip a step and this step is a problem, you're protected. But what I wanted to say is in terms of, I think, right, so Keith would have mentioned that we're here primarily because of the whole Larry Nassar situation with the U.S. gymnastics team. And I know that a lot of us are expecting legislation, but I wanted to draw attention to the fact that the UK got their legislation in 2006. It's not that this has been an issue that has been so pressing that, oh yes, we should have had legislation a long time ago, because you need to understand the context in which we're operating, right? And they just got their legislation, relatively speaking, within the context of the law. So we're still working on the steps to getting there, gathering the information on the statistics and the frequency and the persons who are likely to abuse their authority.
For the police, for example, this is just an example. There are cases that we know some persons have been accused of abuse, and yet we see them around children all the time. What do we have to wait until an incident happens or it is reported? What is the step with that if you know that this person has been associated with this sort of behavior and they're around athletes or children?
Well, you see, the responsibility of whose organization they are part of, that's what I was saying from the beginning.
Okay.
These organizations also have a responsibility. Now, until somebody is not convicted of an offense, the police cannot presume that they are guilty of the offense.
Right.
So even if when they're arrested and charged, they're still not found guilty as yet. So there is a process as for the police themselves. There's a we cannot do certain things without the court making certain decisions, even though the law allows us to go up to that point. Now, this is where the organizations comes in. And I was saying from the beginning, we don't just part ways with the coach and then we come and when everybody asks, why did you fire your head coach? We say, oh, we have differences in the way, the direction the organization should go. And you be diplomatic and you sweep it under the carpet. You don't want to talk about it. You don't want to say, well, there was allegations of sexual abuse against this coach by a number of our athletes. And as a result, we have enough evidence with it that governs our association that we had to part ways with him. So everybody will know that is the situation is alleged. You're not going to say he did it, allegedly, to protect the organization and so on. So there's a part to play with the organization. The police can only do certain things where the law speaks for them to do it.
And speaking of the law, the best defense to defamation is truth. So if you didn't do it, cool, sue me, right?
No, but I'm thinking about this also because I'm working in a sector where we're in a similar place and I think this is the case with most people who work in human and social services right now in St. Vincent, that we are all in varying spaces of needing updated legislation, needing things to actually be enshrined in policy, having to undertake internal and cultural changes to try to bring ourselves up to our current understandings of people's rights. The thought that went through my head listening to the conversation was, as Officer is saying, if you've got an organization, what is to stop you from having an internal code of conduct? Write your own.
Fair enough.
The person was in breach of the code of conduct. As the organization is responsible for protecting people's safety, they were in breach, we let them go. And because there's one of the things and it's a great frustration to me, and maybe the reason I didn't go into the law, there's a difference between ethics, justice, and law. And sometimes justice is not adequately provided by the law. And sometimes a thing can be just this side of legal, but be unethical. Oh. So you attempt to set up guardrails inside your organizations to try to account for some of that.
I love that you highlighted that point, Dr. Alvis. And this is to stem the thinking process of everyone, that we understand the different components and dynamics in which these things can take place, because something may be ethically wrong, but legally it's not wrong. So therefore, we have to be very conscious about those things and know how we're going to approach them, who we report them to. And another challenge sometimes we'll have, which sometimes is cultural, and I'm just being antagonist sometimes, okay, so don't shoot me, but sometimes the persons who are supposed to report these challenges to are part of the problem, or sometimes persons feel, and I'm going to go to a question just now, that certain persons get away with certain things within the society. Before police take up this one, I'm going to ask the social worker and the psychologist to address this in terms of how persons, because a lot of persons approach is from a fear perspective, because they already feel like, why report this? If I report, for example, Khalil, and I know that he's going to get away with it, why even report it in the first place? Because that is a lot of the challenge that we face sometimes within organization, like, why bother?
If we don't report it, nothing is going to happen. If we report it, we may not see anything happening, but we have to make a report. If we're not talking and having these tough conversations, then we don't know where things will go. As a social worker, I've seen over the years where a case is reported, came to the hospital setting, and then after that, nothing happened. Sometimes even the law, it takes long to process things. I remember in 2019, there was a case related at the hospital, and then just before the volcano erupted, I was summoned to appear to court. I have no idea what this case was about, because this was since 2019. This is 2 years ago. Searching through the documents, the name rings a bell, but you have to keep searching. And sometimes that's one of the issues that we have within our country, because the court system takes longer. I don't want to say that I know the law to say, okay, I know the reason why, but things take time, and sometimes we can't wait, and sometimes, as was mentioned before, we have to have our own code of ethics and stuff in place. Hence the reason, as a Safeguarding Commission, one of the things that we did is develop a terms of reference. What is it that we want to see happen? Why do we want to see this happen? So in the future, we can have things in place. So once as an organization, you're in breach of the code of ethics, you're going contrary to what we believe in terms of the terms of reference, then action can take place. And it may not have criminal implications, but you have implications in terms of the national organization where you are a member of.
I actually, the conversation we're having right now, I think we're having it at it's a timely moment because we're inside the 16 days of activism with respect to eliminating violence against women and girls. I know, of course, we're speaking about athletes broadly, so of course we're not only speaking about women and girls, but it would be remiss of us to talk about any kind of abuse and not apply an intersectional lens to it and say, okay, there are people who are particularly vulnerable, right? And one of the things that fuels that, and it was among the things that Mr. Joseph said that is kind of one of the obstacles that we're up against, is the idea of, well, what are the cultural norms, right? And among the things that we have to be working against is a culture of impunity, that people think they can do things with impunity. And the only way that you get beyond that, like, yes, laws can be deterrents, institutions are important, we do need political will behind things, I'm not saying no, but who is government representative of? Us, right? We get to say what we deem acceptable. And so when you report things, like even in the midst of being concerned about the repercussions, I think, as Mr. Bailey was saying, you got to be thinking about, well, what future am I creating for people, right? So my inclination would be, and hopefully conversations like this and forums like this make people feel more galvanized around the idea that there are more people thinking in this way, that if they made a report, somebody's not going to come at them and be like, oh, why would you say that? And you bring somebody dirty, you're gonna mess with their reputation, yada, yada. No, we're thinking about people's safety. And that's something that we all have individual responsibility to. It isn't just a government concern or an official concern. We create safety for each other. And one of the ways that we do it is by being courageous.
A question from the audience, and you can continue on that point if you wish. There is no reporting or mandatory reporting outside the home. Where is data going to come from to drive legislation?
Remember, as we said at the beginning, we still have the criminal code, right? You report offenses to the police. The police gather the data, okay? And then we have other departments, other organizations that may extrapolate data and say, oh, well, these particular offenses pertain to children within sporting situations. These particular offenses pertain to adults within sporting situations. So it's not that, yes, we do not have specific provisions, but you are still able to start somewhere. There's still, yes, what Dr. Alvis said, a crime is still a crime. We can still get the information to at least start to figure out if this is really a big problem, a widespread problem within our society.
Okay. And how do we prevent people or discourage persons from taking the law into their own hands?
How do we discourage them?
Because if persons feel like, okay, this is going to take too long with the police, or I'm not going to get any justice out of this.
It depends on how you define justice. So I think Dr. Alvis was speaking about, or somebody was speaking about the organization. So if it is that I am, for example, I'm a known, or I was ejected from X organization because of my breach of the code of ethics, and it emerges that the particular breach pertained to my conduct as it related to the children within that context. And I want to say that we underestimate the power of the network. So I would imagine that there's an umbrella organization that covers all sporting organizations, and you guys must have some point of contact. I know we love commerce, right? Come on. Hi, I'm just giving you the heads up. So and so, they might be looking to join your organization. This is a person you should be concerned about. But even outside of the context of gossip, we still have to, as organizations, do our due diligence. And in doing our due diligence, we would be having conversations with similar organizations, finding out, I noticed that this person has applied to be on my board of directors. I think they would have mentioned, or maybe they didn't mention, maybe because I am paying attention to my particular sector, I recognize, no, but they used to be a part of your organization. Why did the relationship break down? And then in having those discussions or making those inquiries, you're then able to figure out, okay, well, this isn't a person that I want operating within our space, you see? Or in my disclosing it, then it comes out that this is not a person that we want operating within the space. And then I might feel some measure of satisfaction as somebody who suffered the abuse. I might say, okay, good. You're no longer part of my space, and you're not able to do this to anybody else.
So it's, as you guys have been saying, and Mr. Joseph has been saying, it's a shared responsibility and it's a united approach that needs to be taken to get us there. But one more before you
I was just going to answer the question.
Okay, we're going to answer it. Go ahead.
Yeah.
And then we have a question.
What I
here from
usually tell
Facebook.
persons when they're frustrated about how the process the law have to take. Because as a police officer, you can't just do any and anything. Because if you do it rush and you do any and anything, when you get to the court, then you might not get the conviction that you need. So there's a process.
Right.
And then sometimes persons get frustrated and say, well, let me speak a little bit. Officer, so we're going to go down there now and chop him back up. I say, well, listen, if you do that, you are now giving away your right and the power that you have. And then you now become the perpetrator. And now the police have to come and arrest you. And then now you are behind bars and you might go on over the board, you might kill the person, even more serious injuries can be inflicted on that person. And if you're talking about protecting your child or children, if you end up in prison, who's going to protect them then? So these are the kind of reasoning you bring to persons who might want to take the law into their own hands. And even if you want to say justifiably, because of what might have happened, but in the context of the law does not provide for vigilante justice. So we have to trust the process, and once we provide the information and it is properly done, then you can gain that conviction. And justice sometimes takes a little while through to the process. It is just what it is. But that doesn't mean you will not get justice, and so we have to understand that. And we want to teach our children the same thing. We don't want them to always retaliating and hitting back and, without seeking the way to adjust and walking away from violence without the use of conflict resolution. You understand? We walk away from the way of doing things all the time. You hit me, I hit you back. And some parents can say, chop him back or bust his head. Things like that. And so if you as a parent does that, what kind of example are you setting for the child or the children to follow? And so I personally, and I know my colleagues as well, we try to get these persons to understand it is better you allow the law to take its course than you end up behind bars for thinking that you want justice.
Fair enough.
Could I just say something?
Sure.
I understand what the officer is saying, but perhaps we need to look at what happened in the case of the U.S. gymnast. For more than 30 years, a doctor abused more than 150 children. For more than 30 years. These were not poor people children. These were wealthy people children. In many instances, the parents were in the room. In many instances, the parents were in the room. And they trusted the doctor so much that they really believed that it was an honor to have him treat their children. And he abused them in front of their parents. right? Years and years of complaints to law officers were turned away. They were jeered at. Nobody took them seriously. It took those children when they became adults, and some of them went into law themselves, that made the case. Now, US Olympics, US gymnasts have had to pay them over $400 million. But the most interesting case is the $138 million that the Department of Justice of the United States has to pay them. The Department of Justice, for failing to protect them and doing due diligence with regard to the cases that were brought before them. That's the most interesting case. And the Department of Justice has not appealed the decision, right? Because we are dealing with people's lives. Parents in our society sometimes are the ones encouraging their children into prostitution. Parents in our society are competing with their children for relationships. That's the reality that we are living in. The children are not living on Mars. They're living in a society where they see these things happen. We're living in a cocoon, and information comes all around. So if we continue to pretend, and if we continue to hide behind and under covers, and not come to terms with the reality of what is happening in our society, all of this makes no sense, right? We can stay and argue and argue. We know that the law says sometimes domestic disputes, and they take a very long time because this is sometimes you have to be careful, because next thing you know, justice wheels turn very slowly, and by the time the case comes around, the people make up, etc., etc. But there are people who are scarred for life. They're scarred for life. And we need to go beyond that. And that happens in our schools as well. So we're in a situation, guys, where remember that teachers are increasingly fearful of students. That's the society in which we are living. So we can talk and talk about things that we can or cannot do, and put all the sort of limitations we can on the way we practice law as of now, as distinct from what we ought to be doing in responding to what is happening out there. Because if we stay behind, we will forever be left behind. And that's why we end up in situations now where we cannot even account for the spate of murders that we have in our society. We have to be particularly careful about the future of our society and the children that we have growing up in our midst. Who is going to take responsibility? We can't just say that it might be the parents who's supposed to, or the church, or the teacher, or whoever. It has to be all of us. And unless we take that approach, we will continue to be looking for reasons as to why we can't and why we didn't. And we will never be forgiven by generations as yet unborn.
Thank you, Mr. Joseph. And on that note, P12U5, vehicle is blocking someone. Please, just move it nicely. Thank you. A question from Facebook. How does the Commission intend to take its safeguarding measures? Would it become mandatory for all sporting bodies affiliated with the NOC to implement safeguarding measures within the organizations?
Right. So once you affiliate, there are 15 affiliates to the St. Vincent and Grenadines Olympic Committee. Once you are affiliate to the Olympic Committee, you are guided by the policies that they put in place. They also have a code of ethics for athletes traveling. When you're traveling as well, the athletes and coaches need to do the drug abuse session as well. So there's an online course that you have to do. So all these things are in place. But one of the things that we don't want to do is just to put a policy in place and it contradicts the other associations. Yes, it may be. That's why you're consultation. Yes. So that's what we're doing. So what we're doing presently is starting the awareness. There was a session earlier this year where we had the affiliates come, where a law enforcement officer from the Human Trafficking Unit, a medical social worker, and a child care and protection officer. So we started to build the awareness. Then we created terms of reference. Then also during the summer, most of the affiliates had summer camps. So there were sessions done with the athletes, just bringing them aware of what is out there. And surprisingly, all these young athletes were aware that this was wrong. And I think the school has a lot to do with where they have good and bad touches. So they were aware of, okay, this is bad, this is good. So, and if something is to happen, they know who they can report it to. So I always like to bring the point about rugby. Every time they finish playing a match, they go and drink. And that's their culture. And that may not be the culture for every other sport. So you have to take all of that into consideration before you just go ahead and say, this is a policy for the National Olympic Committee, everybody has to go for it. There's so many different steps that has to be taken place, because if we just put a policy in place, then and say we discipline this affiliate, then we may not have any affiliates affiliated to the Olympic Committee. So it has to take different steps. So presently, we are in the third phase of the development, and within the next few months, there should be another phase in terms of training safeguarding officers, and then working with the other stakeholders. As you said, we cannot do this alone. It has to take everybody. And as a society, we have to go back to where a village can raise a child.
The right village. This question from the audience, because some of this village has changed so significantly, we don't want the village raising the children at all. This village is strange. Anyway, shouldn't we focus on empowering individuals/children in what healthy connection looks like and what safety means, paradigm shift in values?
Give me that one more time.
Shouldn't we focus on empowering individuals/children in what healthy connection looks like, question, and what safety means? I don't know if that's question or shouting, not shouting, but exclamation, and paradigm shifts in values.
Well, I suppose my short answer to that is yes. So I think this is tied to some other things that that various persons and myself would have said earlier, that we're here talking specifically about sports and athletes, but everything is of a piece, right? All of it is connected to each other. And in the same way that if we were actually going to do implementation for safeguarding, it would require an intersectoral response. In the same way, establishing the culture that would be required for this to actually fly, that has to happen in a variety of spaces. Spaces like the home, of course. You want to be equipping children with thoughts about, okay, who are the people that they are supposed to be trusting, right? The idea that my body belongs to me. What do I do if somebody speaks to me, touches me in a way that makes me uncomfortable? Who or that hurts me? Or if somebody asks me to keep a secret, that adults don't ask children to keep secret. Also, adults don't ask children for help with things like ideas like that are things that we have to establish in our homes, in our schools, when children are very young, right? And those are all of the things that come to bear on being able to successfully create safe spaces in other contexts, right? So my general answer is yes. Something that I like to bring up over and over again, and I think it may be something that goes back to our colonial past and even the ideas that we have absorbed about what makes for a successful society. There's a lot of indoctrination around obedience as the idea for what creates safety. But I don't think obedience is really what does it. Because obedient to who? And obedient under what circumstances, right? It's easy for me at least to see how that could fall apart. Because then once I don't think that anyone's there wielding a big stick to make me do the thing that I'm supposed to do, then what's to make me do it? But if we are putting forward ideas that have to do with kindness and mutual respect as the driver for the things that we do, I think that's a lot more sustainable and it's a lot more transparent. It isn't that I'm asking you to follow rules, for example, in a school environment because I said so, because I'm bigger than you. It's because we all want to be in a space that's safe. We all want to be in a space where we can expect to be cared for. We all want to be in a space where we can expect to be spoken to respectfully, right? So what I would love to see in my personal utopia, I suppose, would be that when we're speaking to people about the kind of values that we want to see day to day, that we come to it from that space of kindness and empathy, as opposed to just saying, oh, well, it's the right thing to do. It's about obedience and deportment. Because I don't think that works.
And as it relates to paradigm shift, we have to realize that this generation, especially of young people, see and operate completely different. I promise you have a child now and you will be completely challenged about everything you know about yourself. They ask why and they want to know why to why, and you can't just, it's no longer a generation where kids are seen and not heard. These children are bursting through doors. These children are making it clear of what they like and what they don't like, which includes their sex and sexuality, which is a challenge for a lot of us to deal with based on the generational barriers, but it's something that we're going to have to include, especially because our children are not just operating in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but they're operating in other spaces where people identify differently, whether it is as trees, as animals, and kindness and respect comes into play for stuff like this, because it's not always identifying around sex and sexuality, which I think a lot of people get riled up about. But how do we have our children and our athletes enter these spaces and still be able to operate respectfully and operate with kindness and in a way that is not going to misrepresent themselves and their country? Because when you're operating out of the country, you are representing a country, and these things can have major implication. So it's all a part of the conversation that we'll have. You'll both respond to that, and then we have another question.
So just to follow on to what Dr. Alvis and actually what you were saying is that, yes, we want to empower the children, but I think another important component is re-educating the parents, because they would have grown up with those norms, and they're seeking to enforce those norms without really understanding the context in which they're operating, which is what you were saying. So re-education is also an important component of that.
But you're also forgetting that a lot of our parents are children.
Yes. Yes. But that's why they
Can you
need
explain that? Because people watching on Facebook and stuff, and some persons I understand what you're saying, but some person don't understand what you mean by our parents are children. You may have some people freaking out right now.
We have a lot of persons that, we have a lot of young persons, teenagers that are becoming mom. So they weren't given the opportunity to be a child. They became pregnant, and so they had to grow up right away. And sometimes they don't have the support of their family to play that role in developing the child.
Or even people who came to parenthood in maybe the more expected fashion when they were chronologically adults, but because of the way they themselves were parented, they don't have the best emotional regulation. They may have been subject to harsh parenting themselves. So we do what was modeled for us. We parent the way we were ourselves parented in a lot of circumstances. So if you have come along thinking, well, this is how we do things, then yeah, you're still operating from the space that you were parented from. And in some cases, well, the thing that I was thinking too is that there's a lot of hurt children living inside big people that we see walking around. And some of the reactions that people have to, for example, more conscious parenting, or parenting that engages children as actual autonomous beings, I think people are triggered because of their own desires, their own rights, their own dreams and wishes that were suppressed. And it takes them right back there, and it's really hard for them to then be like, okay, now I'm going to give all of these things to this little person now. What about me? There's a deep reaction from some people that comes from that place.
Yeah, I am going to go back to the empowerment part of it as well. And this is why whatever policy the sporting departments, bodies enact in terms of safety guidelines and safeguarding policy must involve a responsibility also to the children or the athletes themselves, to let them know that they are better than the marijuana smoking and the drinking of consumption of alcohol, that so-called culture or norm, you know, that is harmful to them and is impeding their ability to reach the full potential that they should be. And they should also be held accountable for their action. Too many times as parents, as a society, we excuse a lot of our children ill discipline and because they might be an athlete. And it starts from the primary school level, where the star athletes are given certain preferential treatment. And that kind of thing kind of goes all the way to secondary school and right into the adulthood, where they feel that I am the star and nobody can talk to me. I can come to training when I feel like, if I don't feel like train, if I don't feel like this. And because they are the star athletes, we allow them to, now the policy, you have to safeguard them from themselves too. Because with that kind of mentality, you cannot really excel. You cannot get to the top. You cannot be the best you can be if that's how you see things. Because out there, if you are late and you are not on time, you're going to lose your spot to somebody else. And so we have to train them from we down there that even though you might be the star athlete, you know, if you don't adhere to the rules and the regulations, sit down on the bench, you can't get in the game, and that will help them motivate them. So yes, empower them, but empowerment must also come by teaching them how to be disciplined, you understand, so that they themselves can know how to act.
We have two questions here from the audience. One is, if a person is being ejected from an organization and wants to go to another one, with all the evidence of unethical issues not being documented, how can you bridge that gap in reporting as you are liable of getting sued? So that's one. And two, you want me to just read the other one? Two, we are focusing more on the physical aspect of abuse. My question is, what advice or steps do you give athletes that face the challenge of verbal or mental abuse, whether by coaches or even students or athletic body?
Okay, where do I begin? Yes, okay, you're liable to be sued, okay? But the best defense to defamation is truth. And even in terms of what Dr. Alvis was saying, read the code of conduct, and even in terms of the disclosure that you might want to make, you're saying that there were allegations of sexual abuse on your part. I didn't say that you sexually abused anyone. You can't misconstrue what I said. Yes, allegations were made. I didn't say that you sexually abused anyone, and it's up to the other organization now to take that as they see fit.
So we're teaching persons to use the word alleged. Guys, use the word alleged. It was alleged. It is alleged.
Yeah, but we can't operate from a place of fear. You know, I want to make a personal disclosure. I watch a lot of housewives. I know y'all know about receipts. Receipts, okay? Keep your receipts. You can't tell me that I lied. Let's go to court. Sure, let's disclose to her ladyship what exactly you were ejected for and why I made the statements that I made. Sure, let's go. I have all my WhatsApp messages. I have all your nice little videos and photos and whatever else you sent to me. I'm sure we're seeing the prosecutions under the Cybercrime Act. That's what that goes back to, your receipts. Need to pay attention. They can't defeat you if you're telling the truth.
So one, if it is say it is alleged. Two, make sure you have proof. And once it is true, then it's not really an allegation, right? But if somebody has repeated, they have to say it's alleged.
And if you want to add, each organization should have a code of ethics. And that is where the safeguarding policy comes in, right? So that if when the next organization asks, you say that they violated our code of conduct based on XYZ is the case, and you can't tell me that I can't say you violated our code of ethics and so on. It might not be criminal, as the doctor said, but ethically, it is wrong. And so we do not uphold or stand for this kind of nonsense, so that is why we let him go. He could vex till the blue, she could vex till the blue. The fact is the fact, and you have something to stand on based on your own policies.
Keith, you hearing me? I don't know if Keith or Shimano could answer this one, but as it relates to St. Vincent and the Grenadines and the safeguarding officers on the international arena, what provisions are being made to protect them or to accompany them for support when they're in those spaces?
Keith, did you hear what she said?
What was that?
She was asking what provisions and measures would be put in place to support safeguarding officers and the...
To safeguard athletes
to safeguard athletes as they go out to perform regionally and internationally.
Well, part of the answer to that will be determined by the work of the commission. That's why we established the commission, so that it is not left to the association themselves, because you may very well find that it's not a homogeneous group of persons leading sporting organizations that are sufficiently conscious of the reality of safeguarding. And hence, if we have a group of persons who, A, are sufficiently trained, etc., then perhaps among the first group of people to be trained would be the sport administrators of the various national associations, so that they become sufficiently aware of what is required. Secondly, the other sports stakeholders, the coaches, the technical officials, the volunteers, all of them need to be involved. There's no category in society that impacts sports that should not be exposed to the same training that you all are being exposed to. But I also want to say that a way of participating more deliberately in the discussions you've been having is that we need to avoid the continuing belief that girls are the only ones exposed to abuse. That is rapidly changing in the society. But it's also changing, and I'm sure that the law officers will soon enough have to deal with that, is the definition of gender. What is happening globally in terms of the redefining of gender is something that will eventually impact international society. We can't sit back and wait. It is already happening. Look at Canada's laws, and you'll see there are about 18 or 19 definitions for gender in the legal system, right? That is reality coming at us. Additionally, I think that when we're looking at athletes, we're looking at their whole development. Their whole development. All right, that's what our education program is about. It's the total development of the individual. And so we talk about abuses in terms of smoking, in terms of marijuana, in terms of alcohol, and so on, and those other kinds of things. But remember that the health sector is also very, very concerned about the recent release on heart attacks being the #1 killer in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. That has something to do with active lifestyles or lack thereof. Yeah, the issue of non-communicable diseases and chronic non-communicable diseases. We talk about each year, one day on the 12th of September, celebrating Caribbean Wellness Day. Yeah, right, we acknowledge the day. We do little about it. So that if we're looking at the wholesome society, everything has to be fit into the package. We know that different categories of individuals and groupings within the society have responsibilities, but there's an overriding shared responsibility that we all have, and that is to look to create a better society. Nelson Mandela attempted to suggest that, sport can change societies, it can change the individuals within society. There are a lot of positives in sport, there are a lot of negatives. And we have to be able to work, because there are many people who run from homes to sport, because that's the only place that they feel that they are human, that they are persons, they are whole persons. And I think we need to recognize that responsibility. Some associations complain about, their coaches being made to be nursemaids, to be everything to every child. But if you don't have that at home, where else are you going to get it, right? And so that kind of brainstorming about all of these issues, I think the takeaway from this evening's launch is that sporting bodies are prepared to do something about creating a better society in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And so the challenge that you have as a commission is to embolden yourselves so that the empowerment emerges from the education and training that you receive, and that you can pass on to others, so that eventually the use of the media, the use of the various media sources, media options, media platforms would encourage others to want to do more about creating a wholesome society. Sport is as good a point of departure as any place else. And I think that what you've started this afternoon is something that is important for the full development of persons who are Vincentians and create Vincentian society. So yes, I think, Nika, you are part of this commission, and you too have a responsibility in the areas where you work, as well as where you pray and play, so that we all take that seriously. But your commission will play a leading role, and I suspect that you will expand and try to encourage more groupings in the Vincentian society to take on the responsibility of taking care of our society.
Thank you for that charge and call to action, Mr. Joseph. We're wrapping up now, so we'll just go around the panel and ask everyone to give final words. Again, the topic is bridging the gap between sports and safety. We'll start with Sergeant Billy.
All right. I would like to say that, as I said from the beginning, it is high time that the sporting bodies enact policies in terms of safeguarding policies to protect our athletes. And I have a very vested interest in the children and the youth. I mean, it's for everybody. And it cannot just stay at one level. And we only spoke of just the top of the issue of what is related to safeguarding. But also, when they enact these policies, they have to ensure that when parents send their children to athletics and other training, that the same children are not left on the side of the road to fend for themselves to reach home after the hour. Or when they leave straight from school to go to the training, all you give them is a bottle of water, and they're hungry. So all this must be a part of their policy, and even down to the driver, there must be a vetting process, so you know whose hand you are placing people's children in, and the coaches must be vetted, and the organization, when the policy also is enacted, must bear some responsibility. If they fail, in to do their background check and ensure that whosoever, some people will fall through the crack, you can't beat that. But then when they do, and it is identified that these organizations may not just sweep it under the rug, move them from one position to the next, or just quietly relieve them of their duties so that somebody else who don't know can hire them to continue preying and to damaging and destroying our nation's youth, our athletes, whether they are adults or not. So my vested interest in this is to see a policy that really have the teeth and the bite. When it's ethically wrong, you deal with it from the organizational standpoint. When it is against the laws of St. Vincent and Grenadines, you deal with it from that point of view. We can't constantly and continue trying to shield people because of good name or culture or in the name of culture, while destroying our athletes and destroying our youth And you will hear the good doctor talk about it in terms of the mental impact and the social impact and the lives of children. As a police officer and a police youth club coordinator, I see directly how those things affect our children. And so sometimes when you see our children running away from home, they're not just running away from home. You heard Mr. Joseph said they are running away from home to sport, but there are some persons who run away from home to meet a boyfriend or somebody else, or go on the street and hang out or run into crime. So that is why it's so important that we put policies in place to protect them. So sometimes the protection doesn't come from home. And when we are in these groups, and the president said it from the beginning, let us start with the different organizations and the community group and start, and as the good doctor would say, start the change within our own culture by adapting norms that are good for our holistic development. Not because we say, oh, it's a culture, and we just sweep it under the carpet. A coach having a lifelong relationship with a teenager, they become adults, and he's still a coach, coaching other people's children without no accountability and so on. That cannot continue to happen. There must be some accountability, and these persons, when they contravene the criminal code, must be prosecuted to the full extension of the law. So that's how I see it.
Thank you, Sergeant Billy.
Well, I feel like he said everything there is to be said, truthfully. But I just want to stress that, we really shouldn't preoccupy ourselves with worrying about, oh, yes, is this covered under the law? Do we have laws to address this? We need to start at the beginning, like he said, with our individual organizations and creation of codes or policies outlining what it is we will and will not accept, and then the law will follow. The law will follow because you've established what it is you want.
Right, so I'm going to keep mine short and sweet too. I think just underscoring the idea that advocacy is something that happens in both large, loud spaces, but also in small, quiet spaces, right? So think globally and act locally. You can contribute to conversations that will serve to protect athletes just by the kind of conversations that you're having in your homes, in your schools, among the people that you have direct influence over. And I guess just to underscore something I said before, be courageous. It requires courage to change anything. So take courage and be courageous, model courage for other people.
So, as we move forward, we have launched this initiative. We have heard said over and over that it takes different sectors, multidisciplinary approach. And in order for change to happen, we have to start somewhere. So we started tonight. So tonight we have started the process and change in the way we view sports, the way we view safety, and then within a few years from now, policies, laws, and everything will be in place. But tonight we have become the catalyst for change.
Give our panelists a warm round of applause for taking their time out to share with us tonight. Thank you, Mr. Joseph, for staying on despite the connectivity issues. Thank you so much. At this point, we are going to invite Ms. Akiyama Johnson, who is also a safeguarding officer, to move the vote of thanks.
Good night, everybody. I'll try to make this quick. On behalf of the Safe Sport Committee, I want to express our sincere gratitude to everyone who made tonight's event, Bridging the Gap Between Sports and Safety, a success. A hearty thank you to our distinguished panelists, Ms. Franklin, for your legal insights into safeguarding measures, Dr. Alves, for emphasizing the importance of mental health in sports, Mr. Billy, for your valuable perspective as a sergeant of police, Mr. Joseph, for taking the time out to be a part of this evening's discussion despite the distance, time difference, and technical issues, Mr. Bailey, for your dedication as our safeguarding lead. A special thank you also to our host, Mrs. Anderson Isaac, for your expertly guiding this evening's discussion, and thank you also to the Olympic Committee for championing the initiative, and to Beachcombers Hotel for providing this fantastic venue. right? To our attendees, both in person and online, your engagement shows a shared commitment to ensuring safety, safer environments for all athletes and stakeholders. For VC3, for pending with us through this lengthy procedure today, we want to thank you for championing the cause with us so that we could get our message out. And lastly, to my fellow committee members, your hard work, dedication, I must say it is commendable. Together, we are creating a meaningful change in safe sports. Thank you and have a wonderful evening. Before you go, we have some refreshments, and then you can mingle and then leave. Thank you.
So I just want to say thank you to Ms. Akema Johnson for saying thank you. And just before we mingle together, I'm just going to ask all the members that are present for the Safeguarding Committee to just come forward so persons can have an idea of the persons that will champion this cause in the interim until we expand. So our president is Mr. Shimano Bailey. Stand. I have to call everybody name? Okay, sorry.
Sorry. Basically, safe. So we were a few weeks or days ago. The Olympic Committee launched the Gender Equity Commission, and this both commissions play a vital role in the development of our athletes going forward. So going forward, both commissions will work together as we create a safe environment for our athletes. And apologies for the absence of our president and the General Secretary, Mr. Keith Joseph, who joined us. Oh, and my apologies for our fellow commission member, Dylan Durant, who is out of state presently.
Thank you. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for coming to share in this time with us of conversation around bridging the gap between sports and safety. Please mingle, get something to eat, and have a safe journey back home.
Thanks everybody for me. Good. Thank the panelists. Great man.
All right. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much.